Have you ever wondered about the hidden stories that shape a country's soul? Today, I want to take you on a journey through a part of Brazilian history that is rarely talked about, but deeply powerful: the story of Islam in Brazil. Brazil is a country known for its rich cultural mosaic and its deep Catholic roots, a legacy of Portuguese colonization. But within this dominant narrative lies a lesser-known, yet equally vibrant thread: the story of Islam, woven into Brazil's past through struggle, migration, and resilience. Let's begin where this story truly starts. Not in a mosque or a university, but in the dark, tragic holds of transatlantic slave ships. From the 16th to the 19th century, millions of Africans were forcibly brought to Brazil, ripping from their homes, their languages, and their ways of life. Among them were countless West Africans who were already Muslim, particularly from the Yoruba, Nago, Hausa, and Mandinka communities. These were not just people of faith. Many were literate in Arabic, scholars of Islamic law, teachers, and spiritual leaders. And despite the brutality of slavery, they clung to their faith, praying in secret, fasting in silence, and whispering verses of the Quran in the dark. One of the most powerful moments in this history took place in Salvador, Bahia, on January 25, 1835. It's known as the Malê Revolt, the largest slave uprising in Brazilian history, and it was led by African Muslims, both enslaved and free. Known as the Malays, they rose up against a system that had tried to strip them of their religion, their language, their dignity. Though the revolt was ultimately crushed, its legacy remains a symbol of resistance, not just to slavery, but to cultural and spiritual erasure. In the aftermath, the Brazilian authorities cracked down even harder, banning Islamic texts, burning manuscripts, and punishing anyone who dared to practice the faith openly. With time and under immense pressure, Islam among Afro-Brazilians began to fade. Forced Christianization, cultural assimilation, and loss of language all played their part. Many African descendants turned to Catholicism or Candomblé, a powerful syncretic religion that preserved African spirituality within a Christian framework. But even then, traces of Islam never fully disappeared. In places like Bahia, echoes of Islamic rituals, Arabic phrases, and oral traditions still whisper through the generations. Fast forward to the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and Brazil saw a new wave of Muslim influence, this time through immigration from the Middle East. Arabs from Lebanon, Syria, and Palestine arrived seeking opportunity and safety. While most were Christian, a small but significant number were Muslim, and they settled in cities like Sao Paulo, Paraná, and Rio de Janeiro. These communities established mosques, halal businesses, and cultural centers, becoming an integral part of Brazil's urban landscape. Then came the modern era. Since the 1980s, Brazil has seen a quiet yet meaningful rise in native converts to Islam. Some discovered the faith through marriage. Others were drawn to its spiritual clarity, or stumbled upon it through books, lectures, or online communities. In a world growing ever more connected, Islamic thought became more accessible. And among Afro-Brazilians, many found in Islam a way to reclaim an erased heritage, a reconnection with ancestors who had been forced to abandon their faith. Today, it's estimated that there are up to 25 million Muslims in Brazil, though census numbers are less precise. The heart of this community beats loudest in Sao Paulo, which boasts the country's largest Muslim population and some of its most active mosques and Islamic institutions. But from Foz do Iguaçu to Curitiba, and even in parts of Brasilia, Muslim communities are thriving, comprised of Arab Brazilians, Afro-Brazilians, white and mixed-race converts, and immigrants from Pakistan, Bangladesh, and North Africa. Islam in Brazil today is legally recognized and increasingly visible. Mosques and Islamic centers serve not only as places of worship, but also as hubs of education, charity, and dialogue. You'll find Ramadan iftars open to the public, interfaith events, and youth groups working to build bridges and dispel stereotypes. So where do these communities live? Well, nearly all of them, over 99%, are concentrated in urban areas. Cities like Sao Paulo, Foz do Iguaçu, Curitiba, and Rio de Janeiro serve as the heart of Brazil's Muslim presence. These cities are home to mosques, Islamic centers, halal markets, and growing interfaith dialogues. In these urban centers, Muslims are not only finding space to worship, they're creating vibrant communities. Now let's talk about the ethnic and cultural makeup of Brazil's Muslims, because it truly reflects the complexity of Brazilian identity. Based on that same 2010 census, About 83% of Muslims in Brazil identify as white, which is largely due to the Lebanese and Syrian immigrant roots of many Muslim families. About 12% are mixed race, nearly 4% are black, and smaller percentages identify as Asian or indigenous. These numbers reveal a community shaped by waves of immigration, conversion, and deep historical roots, especially those tied to Afro-Brazilian Muslims descended from enslaved Africans. Another fascinating aspect is the gender dynamic. While about 60% of Muslims in Brazil are men, there's an extraordinary trend when it comes to new members of the faith. Roughly 70% of converts to Islam in Brazil are women, and these are not passive participants. They're scholars, teachers, activists, artists, and professionals. Many of them cite personal spiritual exploration, social justice, or a desire to connect with something deeper as reasons for embracing the faith. Their stories are powerful, and they're helping to shape a new generation of Brazilian Muslims. As for religious denomination, the vast majority of Muslims in Brazil, around 85%, identify as Sunni, which follows global trends. The remaining 15% are mostly Shia, often with ties to Lebanese or Iranian heritage, and you'll find vibrant Shia communities, especially in cities like Sao Paulo and Curitiba. Both Sunni and Shia communities work toward peaceful coexistence in shared religious spaces, contributing to a uniquely Brazilian expression of Islamic life. So while the numbers may seem small on the surface, Brazil's Muslim population is anything but marginal. It is growing, diverse, and increasingly engaged, not just in religious spaces, but in the broader social and cultural fabric of the country. Islam in Brazil is not only a faith, it's a living, breathing story of identity, transformation, and community. Now that we've explored the roots of Islam in Brazil and who makes up this vibrant community, let's dive into what daily life actually looks like for Muslims in Brazil today. Because this story isn't just about numbers or history, it's about real people, real routines, and the beautiful ways that faith and culture come together in everyday life. Muslims in Brazil live full, multifaceted lives, just like anyone else. But what makes their lives particularly unique is the way they weave their Islamic values into the colorful tapestry of Brazilian society. Their daily routines are shaped not only by prayer and religious practice, but by work, family, community, and their place in the cities they call home. So where do most Muslims in Brazil live? The answer lies in the country's bustling urban centers, especially in the southern and southeastern regions. Sao Paulo is home to the largest Muslim population in the country. Here you'll find an impressive network of mosques, Islamic schools, halal restaurants, and family-run businesses that anchor the community. It's a city where Muslims are highly visible and deeply integrated. Then there's Foz do Iguaçu, a city in the state of Paraná, close to the triple frontier where Brazil, Argentina, and Paraguay meet. It has a strong Lebanese and Palestinian presence and is known for its deeply rooted and tightly knit Muslim neighborhoods. Curitiba, also in Paraná, is another hub, home to dynamic Islamic youth organizations and cultural centers that keep younger generations engaged and connected. In Rio de Janeiro, you'll meet a more diverse Muslim population, including converts and Arab Brazilian families, while Brasilia, in the capital, is seeing steady growth, particularly among professionals working in diplomacy and public affairs. But what do Muslims in Brazil actually do each day? Well, like Muslims everywhere, they begin and end their days with prayer, 5 times a day. Many plan their work or university schedules around these sacred moments. In big cities, mosques provide dedicated prayer spaces and hold Friday Jumu'ah prayers, where the community comes together to reflect and reconnect. Evenings often include Quran reading or participation in study circles, especially among youth and recent converts. During Ramadan, the holy month of fasting, families and communities gather for iftar meals, the breaking of the fast, often hosted in mosques or community halls. These gatherings aren't just about food, they're about community, charity, and spiritual reflection. When it comes to work, Muslims in Brazil are present in a wide range of professions. Many are involved in commerce and entrepreneurship, especially Arab Brazilians, whose families have run businesses for generations. Others are engineers, doctors, academics, IT specialists, lawyers, and educators. And while they excel in their careers, they also remain committed to their faith, often participating in community activities outside work. Young Muslims are especially active. They attend Brazilian public and private universities, and many are part of Islamic youth groups that organize lectures, debates, and service projects. For them, being Muslim is not about isolation. It's about integration with purpose. Community life is deeply important. Mosques, known locally as mezquitas, aren't just places to pray. They serve as vital hubs for education and support. You'll find Arabic language classes, Islamic education for kids, marriage counseling, and even interfaith initiatives taking place under their roofs. In places like Sao Paulo and Paraná, there are halal butcher shops and restaurants serving everything from shawarma to traditional Brazilian dishes, faithfully prepared in accordance with Islamic law. Organizations like FAMBRUS, the Federation of Muslim Associations of Brazil, play a major role in uniting different communities, organizing charity drives, cultural events, and public education campaigns. Whether it's distributing food, supporting refugees, or holding Eid celebrations in public parks, these organizations keep the spirit of community alive. Another remarkable trend is the growing participation of Brazilian Muslims in interfaith dialogue in public life. You'll often see them involved in social justice campaigns, online education efforts, and human rights advocacy. In a time when Islam is often misunderstood, Brazilian Muslims are opening their doors, literally. Many mosques host open mosque days, inviting non-Muslims to come in, ask questions, and learn. It's an act of openness that's changing hearts and minds. And through all this, Muslims in Brazil are creating a unique identity, one that is both fully Muslim and fully Brazilian. You'll see modest fashion that blends Islamic dress with Brazilian style. You'll find festivals and community events during Eid, Eid, Quran competitions for youth, and charity efforts that unite Muslims and non-Muslims alike. Perhaps most powerfully, you'll see Afro-Brazilian converts rediscovering Islam as a path to reclaim dignity and ancestral identity, forming a bridge between faith and resistance, history and future. Islam in Brazil is more than a religion. It's a way of life that's growing, evolving, and blossoming in every corner of the country where Muslims have planted roots. Whether in prayer, business, education, or activism, Brazil's Muslims are writing a chapter of their own, one of peace, purpose, and pride. Now, while the story of Islam in Brazil is one of growth, resilience, and vibrant community life, it's also important to acknowledge the challenges that many Muslims in the country continue to face. Because even in a nation that constitutionally guarantees religious freedom, the everyday reality can be very different. The Muslim population in Brazil may be small in numbers, but the challenges they encounter are significant and speak to broader issues of identity, inclusion, and representation. These are not just abstract concepts. They're felt in workplaces, schools, neighborhoods, and public spaces across the country. Let's start with the most visible issue: Islamophobia and discrimination. Unfortunately, global events and negative portrayals in the media often feed into harmful stereotypes. Islam is too frequently associated with extremism, and this leads to suspicion, fear, and prejudice. For Muslim women, especially those who wear the hijab, this can mean being stared at, questioned, or harassed in public, particularly in areas where there is less awareness about Islam. There are also reports of racial profiling at airports or during security checks, particularly for Arab Brazilians and converts. And then there's the workplace, where the challenges become more subtle but no less real. Some Muslims find it difficult to secure jobs that allow them to practice their faith openly, whether that means praying during the day, wearing a headscarf, or being excused from events involving alcohol. Many employers still lack awareness or understanding of Islamic practices, like dietary restrictions or the demands of fasting during Ramadan. As a result, Muslim employees can feel isolated or forced to choose between their professional growth and their religious identity. The education system also reflects this disconnect. Islam is almost invisible in most Brazilian school curriculums. There is very little teaching about Islamic history or the contributions of Muslim civilizations, and that lack of knowledge often leads to misunderstanding and exclusion. Muslim students may encounter ignorant comments in class, feel alienated by the curriculum, or struggle during Ramadan when fasting is not acknowledged or accommodated. Imagine being a teenager, fasting in the summer heat, sitting through hours of class and exams, without so much as a space to pray or a teacher who understands what you're going through. The problem extends beyond classrooms and into the media. In Brazilian film and television, Muslim characters are rarely seen, and when they are, they're often portrayed as villains or cultural outsiders. This media silence, or worse, distortion, perpetuates ignorance and reinforces the idea that Muslims are somehow foreign, even when they've lived in Brazil for generations. For converts to Islam, the journey can be even more complex. Many face rejection from their families, and they often lack strong local support networks, especially outside of major cities. Some Afro-Brazilian converts have reported feeling unwelcome in predominantly Arab-led mosques, where cultural norms may clash or unintentional exclusion takes place. It's a painful irony, finding spiritual belonging, but struggling to find a social home within your new religious community. Then there's the issue of infrastructure. In major cities like Sao Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, Curitiba, and Foz do Iguaçu, the Muslim population is well established, with access to mosques, halal food, and Islamic schools. But in other parts of Brazil, Muslims often have to travel long distances to attend Friday prayers, find halal meat, or seek out community support. In some areas, there aren't even Islamic cemeteries, making religious burials a challenge for grieving families. And finally, one of the most fundamental problems, a lack of data. The last detailed census that included religious affiliation was conducted back in 2010, and even then, the numbers didn't capture the full complexity of Brazil's Muslim population. This lack of current, accurate data makes it incredibly difficult to advocate for policies, request religious accommodations, or develop social services that reflect the community's needs. Without visibility, there's no voice, and without a voice, there's no progress. But despite all these challenges, the story does not end in frustration. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Muslims in Brazil are organizing, educating, and speaking up like never before. From grassroots movements to digital campaigns, they're building spaces that reflect their values and celebrate their identities. Islamic youth groups and women's associations are creating safe, vibrant communities. YouTube channels, blogs, and social media platforms are being used to challenge stereotypes and share authentic experiences. More and more Muslims are stepping into public roles as educators, doctors, politicians, and artists, showing that being Muslim and being Brazilian are not mutually exclusive. They're also engaging in charity work that unites faith and service, building bridges between Muslim and non-Muslim communities, and showing through action what Islam truly stands for: compassion, dignity, and justice. So yes, there are real problems, but there's also real strength. The story of Muslims in Brazil is still being written, and with each voice that speaks out, with each bridge built, and each stereotype broken, that story grows stronger. And maybe that's what makes this community so remarkable. Not just its faith, but its unwavering commitment to belong, to thrive, and to contribute. If this video helped you see a different side of Brazil, one shaped by faith, resilience, and cultural diversity, don't forget to support our channel. Subscribe for more in-depth stories that explore untold histories and real human experiences. Share this video with others who want to learn more about the world beyond the headlines, and let us know in the comments what part of this story resonated with you most. Your voice matters, and together we can bring these important stories to light.